Today we're visiting the Oddfellows building, the hub for over a century of Hellertown activity. It's been known as the Oddfellows building, Masonic Hall, or the Masons building. Both organizations owned the building at one time or another through its lifetime. Between 1830 and 1860, there was a lot of freed up time with the improvements made in agriculture where Pennsylvania German families would form these fraternal organizations because they would have a lot more time to participate in these groups. The origins of the building began across the street in the Laubach Carriage Factory. At the time, it started with the organization of Saucon Lodge 606, which was part of the Independent Order of the Oddfellows, which was a national fraternal organization. In 1962, the Oddfellows purchased the building. It was Hellertown Lodge 563, the Free Accepted Masons, and they did a few renovations to the building also. What they did is they tore off the roof. It had a mansard roof on it, a beautiful mansard roof, and it's a flat roof now. They also bricked up all the windows. It was in 1867 they started this, right after the Civil War. And Hellertown was just a village within Lower Saucon Township. Hellertown wasn't incorporated as a borough until 1872. Previously, a few years prior to that, they purchased this lot. There was a wooden structure owned by the Mall family. The Mall family owned the whole side of this street with buildings because they were famous for manufacturing the Mall rifle right up the street. Local people, local craftsmen, at that time they didn't have architects, formed committees, and they built this building, which was finished in 1877. The population of Hellertown in 1880 was only about 600 people. So a majority of the people of Hellertown participating in these civil groups. They promoted God, country, and socialization. It was right after the Civil War, so there were a lot of orphans and widows from the Civil War times that they could help. It was such a highlight of the community that they actually had a parade through town celebrating the building of the building. Back in the 1880s, a majority of the businesses in town had these overhanging roofs, and this one here on this building now is the last remaining one. There are several owners. Elwood Ball, William, and Foster Eisenhart were the first people who had a drugstore in here. After that, Stanley Eisenhart and Stanley Yeager also had a drugstore and an ice cream parlor. In the 1950s, Lindy Border became involved, and he was a pharmacist in town. It was the beginnings of Yeager's Pharmacy. On the second floor became Borough Hall. Back then they had constables, so they had their borough council meetings here and borough activities on this floor. And on the third floor, they had all their social activities. There was up to 15 different social and civic groups that met on the third floor. 1896 to 1910, they had their school graduations here and their ceremonies here. They had political rallies, band concerts, you name it, they had everything going on here, so it was very active. We're standing on the third floor of a door leading to this room, which 15 different civic groups met, including the Freemasons, the Oddfellows. And on this door, there's a little peephole. We really don't know what that was for. You can use your own imagination. We're standing in front of a placard that was on display at the Oddfellows building right outside the door. On this placard announced all the civic organizations and the days of the month which they met. As you can see, there were quite a few of them. At the bottom is the Saucon Lodge 606. Right above that is the Hellertown Lodge 563. The Hellertown Town Council had meetings every Thursday. Edward Ackerman Post. After World War I, the American Legion formed. Corporal Weaver Camp, he was a casualty of the Civil War, and they also had an organization that met at the Oddfellows building. This ornate piece was built in 1920 and mounted in 1920 by a master craftsman in Hellertown. On each side of the sign are different costumes from that era, turn of the century. This is a Freemasons uniform that they would have wore at their meetings. And here's an Oddfellows costume that they would have wore at their meetings. I'm wearing a costume from probably a combination of the Oddfellows and Freemasons. You can see it's very ornate. And they took a lot of time and dedication to building these type of costumes. They actually wore them at their meetings. That continued till about 1898, when just a few blocks up the street, a new building was built. It was the Dewey Fire Company building in 1898, which became the new jail and a new town hall and police headquarters. To the south of the building, there's a bank. You can tell it's still a bank. In 1924, there was two highway robbermen came by and robbed the building. They went in and actually tied up the owner and the teller, and they got away with $10,000 to $20,000. On the north side of the building, a little wooden structure just attached to the building was my grandfather's John Nagorski's shoe repair shop from 1922 to 52. And it's one of the businesses that have fallen by the wayside with the pay telephone. We are standing on the stairwell leading between the first and second floor of the Oddfellows building. And in 1908, due to a fire in Reading where over 100 people were killed, there were renovations made for the building, which enlarged the stairwell. It was probably narrower than this, but you can see this was an addition here added on, so it made it much wider. And that the door accessing the outside opened to the outside instead of coming in, where the people could escape in case of a fire, because with the second and third floor here, there was probably as many as 100 people up here at one time, and to get out of the building quickly, it made it much safer for them to get out of the building quickly. Rita Roof moved the studio down here in the mid-1960s. Today, it still is a dance studio owned by Holly Brooker, and it's a hub of activity at night and evenings for children, as hundreds of kids come in here and perform their dance and learn dance. In 1983, the Freemasons actually had a meeting. It was their 100th anniversary of the acceptance of their Constitution, and they met in this building, probably on the second or third floor. And that was a big deal, 1983, their 100th anniversary. The Oddfellows building, the hub for over a century, this year will be 148 years old.